hear that train coming, rolling around the bend. I see the sunshine since it yell out on the wind. Stuck in Folsom Prison, time keeps dragging on. I was born in 45, so 45, 65, so I was 25, and I was 20 in 65. So I was in my 20s. Yeah.
Oh.
Well, I graduated from high school in 63, so that way I was 18. So I was 20 in 65, so 25 and 24 in 69, right? In my 20s. And I remember I had a Volkswagen Beetle, and I had a 69 VW Beetle, and I could fill it up for $3. So it was like, well, it was 10 gallons, so it's about 30 cents a gallon. That's interesting. I liked pretty much all the music. I liked Bob Dylan, especially he was just coming into popularity then, you know. I liked a lot of folk music, like the Kingston Trio, Peter, Paul, Mary. I liked, and a lot of rock and roll was just, rock music was just coming, getting real popular then. Didn't really like I liked the Beatles, of course. The Beatles were just becoming popular in about 64, 65. Rolling Stones, yeah, rock and roll. I like rock and roll and folk music, basically, is what I liked. Well, what was on TV? See, I lived on the farm out here, and we only got 1 or 2 channels. So I think, I don't recall any particular programs that I really liked, except, I guess I just don't remember any particular names of any particular shows that were popular in those days. I saw quite a few movies. One of my favorites of the time was a movie called The Graduate. Was real popular with Dustin Hoffman, you know, and it was the music score was by Simon and Garfunkel, so it was a real popular movie. I didn't get to go to Woodstock because we got married the same weekend as Woodstock. But we knew about Woodstock. We were thinking about going. Never did. That was a long ways away from me. I lived in Minneapolis at the time in 69. But I saw a lot of concerts. I lived in Minneapolis from 63 till 71, so we saw quite a few concerts. I saw Sly and the Family Stone. I didn't see the Beatles when they were there. I saw John Denver, saw Peter, Paul, Mary a couple times. Quite a few concerts. I was involved in politics when I was in college. I was on the student senate in college, and basically it's kind of like a grown-up version or a college version, not grown-up version of student council, whereas they represent, we represented the students at student senate in college. Right? So I was involved in politics. I was also involved in the McGovern campaign. When he ran for president, I was involved in a Senate campaign by the name of a guy by the name of Earl Craig, who was running for Senate at the United States Senate at the time, so I did some work for him. That was interesting because the Vietnam War really defined people of my generation, okay? They started drafting people in about 1966 or 67, and if you got drafted, you were going to go over to Vietnam, and there's a good chance you were going to die because you were going to be in the Army. So what I did is I went in the reserves. I went in the Marine Corps Reserves. I spent 6 years in the Marine Corps Reserves from 65 to 71, and we never got called up. We never got activated. I was against the war, very much against the war. I went on protest marches and that sort of thing, so definitely against that. That's why I worked for Senator McGovern, who ran for president, because he was an anti-war candidate. liked to think of myself as I was during the hippie movement. I was also in the United States Marine Corps, so it was kind of a dichotomy. I thought of myself as a hippie in a sense, but I didn't look like one. I didn't have a beard. I didn't have long hair because I had to go to Marine Corps reserve meetings one weekend a month, so you couldn't get too too fuzzy looking. Yeah. But I identified with the hippie movement. I had a lot of friends that everybody was a hippie in those days. Either you were a hippie or you weren't. So there was no in between, pretty much. I did. I had a 68 VW Beetle. I bought it in 1968, brand new. Yeah, there were a lot of parties in Minneapolis. There were parties every weekend. We went to a lot of parties, but there were different kind of parties than there are now, because there were drugs, and alcohol, but and music. But they seemed a lot more peaceful than parties are now. There was very little fighting and that sort of thing in parties in Minneapolis, where I was anyway. So. I've been a fan of the Minnesota Twins ever since they came to Minnesota in 1961. So I remember going to quite a few Twins games at the old Metropolitan Stadium in the 60s. I went to probably, 4 or 5 games a year because I lived in Minneapolis at the time. So yeah, I was a big, I would say a big sports fan, but I definitely liked the Twins. I lived in Minneapolis from 63 to 71, so yeah, pretty much. And then I lived in Barrett till, from before that. So. I played all sports. I was all conference football, and I lettered in football, basketball, baseball, track. I was in band and choir, I was in everything. I went to the University of Minnesota. First of all, I went to Metropolitan Community College for 2 years, which was a 2-year college in downtown Minneapolis. Then I transferred to the University of Minnesota and graduated from there in '72. Here, Barrett. Oh, right. Yeah. No, not so much. Not as much as I don't think it was. From my point of view, it wasn't as much as it is now. I think people were going away from alcohol and getting more into marijuana and LSD, and kind of saying the idea was alcohol is bad for you, but marijuana is good for you. So and it's been proven wrong, of course. But so people were rebelling against the alcohol because they saw the older generation drinking, and they didn't like what they saw. Yeah, I did many times.
How did they act?
How did they act? Well, like they were having a good time for the most part. I never saw anybody had what you would say a bad trip. Although I did hear a lot about that, but I never actually witnessed it myself because I was not that involved with the drug scene at all. Like I said, I was in the Marine Corps at the time, so. In college, I wore an old Army jacket and blue jeans, and pretty much what I wore all the time. Wow, that's a good one. Good question. Well, I really liked John Kennedy, President Kennedy. I was a big fan of his. Hubert Humphrey was a big influence on me. Gene McCarthy who was the United States Senator from Minnesota who ran for president on the anti-war ticket, was a big influence of mine. George McGovern was. And then I remember reading a book called The Silent Spring by Rachel Carlson, and she was a big influence in her teachings. I would have to say at this point Eugene McCarthy. Senator McCarthy, Minnesota Senator, right, Minnesota. Um, I don't know. Well, there was a lot of racial riots going on in Minneapolis at the time, and all throughout the country. Um, uh, there was especially some racial riots in Minneapolis, and they were not good. A lot of people were getting hurt and that sort of thing. So I would have to say the racial unrest and the Vietnam War, of course, I didn't like. That was a big, like I said, that was pervasive. That's all everybody was talking about for a long, long time. Yeah, looking back, the '60s was a really good time. In fact, I wrote a song about it once. So about because of the promise that people didn't live up to the promise necessarily, but there was all these kind of ideas that peace and love is going to prevail in the world, and it was a very good time. One phrase, huh? A time of hope. Let's say a time